JohnSottery.com, I believe it is. And with that, John,
welcome everybody. I promise not to get into too much heavy-duty science. I know when people start talking Mandarin or Greek to you, that your brain gets really tired really fast. That being said, there's been some incredible work that's come out over the last 2 months on the whole COVID-19 thing. And I want to share little slices of that with you because I want all my friends, my family, all the people that I work with and all of you, I want us all to survive this fall and this winter and get through to the point where we have, hopefully a safe and effective vaccine that's available to us. Let me flip over here and dive into my PowerPoint slides. It's funny. I always think of Austin Powers when you go inside the PowerPoint like this. So I'm going to focus on how do you survive COVID-19. And one of the challenges that I see here is that the best science isn't making it on TV. It's not making it into the briefings. And there's a lot of things that you can do right now to massively reduce your risk, but it's just, people are not hearing about it. So I'm going to share with you the data. You can decide if you think it's compelling or not. If it is compelling, then I want you to talk to your doctor. So I got to lean the right way here. So I'm going to give you general health information. And I am a scientist. I'm not a physician. I'm not an MD. So I'm not providing medical advice. And before you do anything in terms of your supplements or your medications or anything, you really need to run it by your doctor and make sure that it's the right thing for you. So everything I'm going to share is what I'm doing, what my family's doing. I have a 10-year-old and an 11-year-old. I'm not saying it's right for you, but I want you to be aware of it, because if it is right for you, I want you to have the ability to go after it. So we just entered the fall, and that means that the sun has now crossed over the equator. It's heading for the southern hemisphere. And you're like, okay, John, that's not news to me. Well, if you watch the news media, they talk about how viruses do better when it's cooler outside, and also that people spend more time indoors. And I think both of those things are true, but they're missing the huge factor, and that is that when the sun crosses the equator, the northern hemisphere, our vitamin D levels are falling right now. They peaked out in September, and they're falling and falling back to the danger zone. And I want to show you data so you can decide if you want to fill that gap, or not. So, all right, so here's my diagram of COVID-19. And first thing that can happen is, there you are up in the upper left-hand corner. You can either not get infected, and that's great, or you may end up with a positive PCR test. Okay, if that happens, then you have, multiple things that can happen. You could have a very mild case, or maybe even an asymptomatic case where you don't show any symptoms, and you recover, your body makes antibodies, you have some level of immunity. That's great. Or you could have a more serious case and end up being hospitalized. Now, again, two things can happen. You might get released in 4 or 5 days, which is great, or you may end up getting worse, ending up with what's called ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. And you may end up on a respirator. And if you end up on a respirator, that's a bad thing, because a lot of people lose that battle. They don't come off of the respirator alive. And then the other thing which is really concerning is a lot of people have survived COVID-19, but they have these lingering effects. And, the doctors call them long haulers. because even though they've gotten better, they don't feel right. They don't feel well. They have issues with their lungs or with their heart. And I want to help you understand how this virus does damage to you, because I don't want you to end up being a long hauler. I don't want you to end up in the ICU. I don't want you to end up with ARDS. So the things that I'm going to focus on they don't require you to go out and get a prescription drug. You don't have to get into a randomized controlled trial, an RCT. You don't have to check into the hospital to get the treatment. I want to show you what you can do based on the best science that I can find, where you can really put on your body armor and really protect yourself from this virus. And I'm hoping that, between you and I and everyone on here, we can kind of get the word out there. It is trickling out little by little. So let me move it forward here. So what are we going to talk about? So first thing is, you got to understand what you're trying to achieve. I don't want people to get sick. I don't want them to get hospitalized. I don't want them to have tissue damage with their lungs or their heart. I don't want to die. I don't want my friends to die. I don't want you guys to pass away. So that's what we're trying to do. How am I going after it? I want to understand at a more molecular level, and I'll keep it simple. How does this virus damage my lungs? How does it damage my heart? And maybe even more importantly, what can we do about it? So what are some of the critical molecules, based on the latest science that's come out? And so I'm going to share a little bit of that with you so you can form your own conclusions. First and foremost, I want to show you 15 seconds of what I was saying back in March, at March 5th, because I jumped into the science in a big way, and I studied SARS-CoV-1, the original SARS. And it was clear to me, one of the things that was clear to me was that vitamin D was pivotal. And so this is what I was saying to the people in my membership back then. Let me see if I can make this work. If you don't have enough 25-hydroxy vitamin D in your body, you are really in a bad situation. My guess would be, if you looked at the 95,000 people that have been infected and the over 3,000 people that have died, my guess is a lot of the people that have been taken by this coronavirus have low vitamin D levels, because that means they have no sky marshals on their airplanes. They have nothing blocking that virus from gaining entry to the cell, getting to the nucleus and taking it over. So you have to bring up. So, that was back when 3,000 people had died from COVID-19. And so based on everything I had reviewed from the original SARS, I thought that low vitamin D was a problem. One of the reasons is that vitamin D controls your innate immunity. And in simple terms, that's your immune system that responds to things that you've never seen before. Okay. And that's critical because no one had ever seen COVID-19 before. So I wanted to amp up my innate immunity. I wanted to do everything I can to block that virus. I really believe back in March, if we could have gotten everyone to address their vitamin D levels, because maybe in March, 70% of Americans were deficient in vitamin D. So I thought that could have been a huge thing. So let's go forward here. So real quick, how did the vitamin D story play out? Well, I was watching it really closely because I thought it was going to become important. So if you look, there were some clues here. In New Orleans, there was a first clue. It was only on 20 subjects, but when they looked at the people in the intensive care unit that were under 75 years old, 100% of them were vitamin D insufficient, below 30 nanograms per milliliter, 100%. So doesn't prove anything, but it was interesting. Then you look in the Philippines, and they had a study on 212, I think, subjects. And what they showed is that people that had normal vitamin D, almost all of those people had a mild case. And the people that were vitamin D deficient, the majority of them had either severe or critical, where they ended up in the ICU. So another piece of data said vitamin D was important. Again, that was in April. Then you go to Indonesia on over 700 patients, and they tracked people's vitamin D levels, and then they said, what was the likelihood of death? And people that had normal vitamin D had extremely low likelihood of death, but people that had high vitamin D, above 30, normal, almost none of those folks died. And, over 90% of the people that were down in the below 20, 90% of those people died. So those are three clues. They don't prove anything. However, they're very interesting, and it tells you that you need to do some kind of randomized controlled trial to see, is this what's actually driving it? So next question. So I think we have some data that says that your vitamin D level determines whether you end up with a mild case or you end up with a very severe case, or maybe even ending up in the intensive care unit and dying. So this question is, well, does your vitamin D level influence how likely you are to become infected, how likely you are to test positive? Because we're doing a lot. We're social distancing. We're not going to restaurants. We're wearing masks. Some of us are wearing eye protection. I mean, we're doing a lot to avoid getting infected. And so there was a study that just came out, recently in the last 30 days, September 17th. So what is that? A little more than 30 days. This was a collaboration between BU Medical School and Quest Diagnostics. And it was on over 191,000 subjects. And what they showed is, as your vitamin D levels go down, your risk of infection goes up dramatically. If you take people from the bottom of the normal range and you compare them to people that are at 20 nanograms per milliliter, your risk goes up 54%. Now, where do I think people should be on the curve? I think people should be in that little green oval between 40 and 50 nanograms per milliliter. So what was their conclusion? That SARS-CoV-2 was strongly and inversely associated with your 25-OH vitamin D. And that was true across in Florida, in Maine, all latitudes, all races, all ethnicities, all sexes, both sexes, and all age groups. It was true for everyone. And this is 191,000 people across the United States. Now, I've seen this mentioned once or twice in the last month, and I was looking for it. It blows my mind. I mean, this is incredibly important to prevent people from getting infected. And since we're on the vitamin D roller coaster and now we're heading down, my expectation would be infections would go up. And, basically that's what we're seeing. So, all right, let's change gears for a second. And I'm hoping the science level is not making you crazy. At a molecular level, how does this virus inflict so much damage to some people? And yet other people, it's like no problem at all. They have a mild case or they don't even have symptoms at all. And, the sub-question is, how does vitamin D fit into this? So, and I know this slide looks scary, but this is a paper that was published, I'm going to say about 60 days ago. It's called the Brady-Kinin hypothesis, and they used a supercomputer to look at gene expression. So they looked at lung tissue samples from people that were infected with COVID-19. And then they compared those to lung tissue samples from people that were not infected. And they looked at gene expression. And I know you hear the word gene expression, you're like, there's no way I can understand that. Well, genes are easy. Genes are just apps on your iPhone or your Android, okay? And every cell in your body has all the apps. But your liver cell only turns on the apps that it needs to be a liver cell. And a skin cell turns on the apps that it needs, and so on. And then the individual organs can turn up and down apps, meaning you can have an app, but if you never run it, it doesn't do anything. So they wanted to say, when people get infected, what happens to those apps that are in their lungs? What is the virus doing when it takes over their phone? What buttons is it pressing to make all this crazy stuff happen? So, and again, I know it's a little bit of a scary slide, but I'll keep it simple. The COVID-19 massively turned up the genes to make something called bradykinin, which is just a signaling molecule that's always present in your body. It also turned down the genes that inhibited it, and it turned down the genes that would get rid of it. So bradykinin levels would start to go up and up. Well, that's interesting because bradykinin does a lot of things in the body. Secondly, COVID-19 massively turned up the genes that get rid of vitamin D. So if you had a pool in your backyard and you have a pool pump that pumps the water out because maybe the pool's at too high a level, if you look at these two genes, the first one was turned up 20,800%. So it was running that app 208 times its normal rate. And then the second one was turned up 46,500%. And so in the cells that were infected with COVID-19, it was getting rid of vitamin D at a massively increased rate. And it turned down something called the VDR, which is the vitamin D receptor. So that's where vitamin D plugs in, because 10% of your genes require vitamin D. So when you get rid of it, lots of bad things happen. Inflammation can go through the roof. You can have an over-the-top immune response, lots of bad things. I said before that, bradykinin levels went up, but there was something else that went up. And you may have heard of this molecule because it's big in the skincare industry. It's called hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid is it's a polysaccharide that can bind 1,000 times its own weight in water. That means that a tiny amount of hyaluronic acid can make a huge amount of Jell-O. So it's beautiful for moisturizing your skin because it holds on to so much water. But it turns out that the genes that the body uses to make hyaluronic acid in the lungs, they were upregulated 911,300% on one of them. But the other one only went up, 49,300%. So your lungs were pumping out a ton of hyaluronic acid. It also turned down the genes that gets rid of hyaluronic acid significantly. So what does this all add up to? Well, when bradykinin goes up, it makes your capillaries very permeable. That means that immune cells can leak out and fluid can leak out. So that's one contributor. So the immune cells bring up the inflammation. The fluid starts filling up those little air sacs in your lungs. And with all that hyaluronic acid, you start making Jell-O in these air sacs in your lungs. So the blood comes back with carbon dioxide to that air sac. It's supposed to dump the carbon dioxide and pick up an oxygen so it can go out and nurture your tissues. But when your air sacs are full of jello, it doesn't work. And so this is one of the ways that COVID-19 apparently kills us, by turning up bradykinin, by turning up hyaluronic acid, and by turning down vitamin D. And in that paper, they make note of that. And they say, wow, one approach would be to use drugs to control bradykinin. And they suggested these 5 or 6 drugs should be put into trials. But the other approach would be to modulate REN levels through vitamin D supplementation. And given how big an effect vitamin D seems to have on this disease, and the fact that you could do this immediately and you don't have to wait 6 months for an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, it sounded pretty interesting to me. All right, we're done with the supercomputer paper. You don't want to make jello in those air sacs in your lungs, and you don't want to get rid of all the vitamin D in those cells because inflammation can go through the roof. Your immune system can start calling in airstrikes and just massively damage your lungs and your tissue. So now I'm kind of a weird guy because I spend hundreds of hours a year reading the scientific literature and trying to figure things out. But I thought to myself, I wish, what would happen if when somebody came in the hospital, if we could almost immediately bring up their 25-OH vitamin D levels? What would happen? I thought to myself, I wish we had a randomized control trial for that intervention. Well, sometimes your wishes come true. And I know you guys have already read this because you all read the Journal of Steroid Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. But in Spain, in October, this month, they did a randomized control trial where they immediately brought up people's level of 25-OH vitamin D. Now, it's a little different than just giving them the vitamin. This is the first thing your body changes. What comes, the vitamin that comes in the bottle, it changes it in the first step. So it's a randomized control trial. That means that they took 76 people that came in consecutively, and everyone got what they call the best available therapy. So everyone in the control group and everyone in the treatment group. But there was one difference. The treatment group got 0.5 milligram of 25-hydroxyvitamin D when they were admitted, which is a pretty substantial dose. And then they gave them a little more than 0.25 milligram on days 3 and 7, and then weekly. And then the control group just got best available therapy. What happened? And again, what happened was breathtaking. In the control group, half of those people ended up in the ICU. And 15% of the people in the ICU died, which was 7.5% of the control group. The people that got the exact same treatment, but also got the 25-OHD, 2%, so 50% down to 2%, were admitted to the ICU, and 0% died. Again, this was a huge thing. If this was a drug, if this was remdesivir, if this was something that cost $1,000 a dose, it would have been all over the world. They would have had their PR people hammering this across the world. It would have been on every channel. But vitamin D, it's not a big moneymaker. It didn't get the press that it should have. This study didn't get the press that it should have. I thought this was huge. So now, why am I concerned today? Because I told you before that vitamin D levels peak in September. Well, guess what? We're on the roller coaster and we're heading down. And unlike the roller coaster, which is scary, but generally you don't get killed, when we get down to those levels of 10, 15, 20, 22 nanograms per milliliter, really bad things happen with COVID-19. And so I think the entire country and the entire world should be carefully raising people's levels. By the way, who is at highest risk of having low vitamin D? Older people, because as you get older, your skin becomes less able to make vitamin D. If you're 80, you might make 1/4 of the vitamin D that you made when you were 30. So you become less good at making it, even if you get the same amount of sun. And those people in the nursing homes, they don't get a lot of sun. So it doesn't surprise me that COVID-19 can just bird through these nursing homes and just, ravage people. So I think we have to, even though things got better from April to May to June, July, August, September, now things are starting to get worse. I'm not saying this is the only factor, but I absolutely believe it is an important factor. Now I'm going to switch gears. We've talked about vitamin D. Let's talk a little bit about magnesium. And you're like, John, why are we talking about magnesium? Like that doesn't make any sense. I was asked to be on this PBS special called Life 201. I wrote a book chapter for them as well. But magnesium, so here's what happens. If you buy a bottle of vitamin D and you consume it, that molecule does nothing for you. It has to be changed in 2 different spots. It has to be changed. Let me see if I can point to it. So I got to point backwards here. But you have to add a couple hydroxyl groups in 2 steps to create what's called 1,25 dihydroxy vitamin D, which I know is a mouthful. If you don't convert it, then it does not work for you. So a lot of people are taking vitamin D now, but what do you need to convert what comes in the bottle to what you need? Interestingly, you need magnesium. You need it in your liver to do the first conversion, step 1, and then you need it in either your kidney or your immune cells to do step 2. So the way to think about it, let's just say the vitamin D is like buying torpedoes for your submarine. The first step is you have to add the detonator. And then the second step is you have to arm the torpedo. So interestingly, there's only 2 types of cells in your body that have the ability to flip it on into a very potent form. And that your kidneys do it to make it for the rest of your body. But your immune cells have the enzyme and they can arm the torpedo directly. And it's that 125 form that makes all the difference. And this is why the folks in Spain didn't just give them vitamin D. They took them to through step 1 and gave them the 25OH form because they wanted to bypass it. Why? Because more than half of Americans are deficient in magnesium. So 70% are deficient in vitamin D, more than 50% are deficient in magnesium. And who's at the highest risk? People that are older are at the highest risk. And I forgot to say earlier, not only are older people at a higher risk for low vitamin D, but the more melanin that you have in the skin, the darker your skin tone, the harder it is for the body to make vitamin D, because melanin is your body's sunscreen and it absorbs that photon, so it's not available to make vitamin D. Now, am I the only one on the planet that knows that you need magnesium to activate vitamin D? Absolutely not. Here's a review article that was published in 2019 where they talk about how critical magnesium is to fixing vitamin D deficiency. So, couple conclusions real quick. that, it's essential in the metabolism, which I absolutely agree with. But here's an interesting point. If you're already low on magnesium and you take a whole bunch of vitamin D, you can induce severe depletion of magnesium in your body. And magnesium is required by 300 enzymes in your body. You can't make energy. You can't make ATP. Your body will die without its magnesium. So when you tell people to take vitamin D, you should also be telling them to balance it with some magnesium. And that was their conclusion. Okay, so we did D, we did magnesium. Let's talk a little bit about zinc. A lot of anecdotal things that have been out there on zinc. I guess what I would say is zinc is real. So if you go back and look at the original SARS, there's an enzyme that coronavirus uses. It's called replicase, and I won't give you the full name, but it's a copy machine. And that copy machine is what the virus uses to make copies of itself to replicate. Well, that copy machine would be nice if we could shut it down. And what they showed for the original SARS was if you had zinc along with an ionophore, something that would transport it into the cell, that you could shut down the copy machine. And I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Zelenko in New York, but he was inspired by this work, and he started a protocol where he gave people 50 milligrams of zinc along with some other molecules, and he had huge success treating people on an outpatient basis. So if that's true, if zinc levels are important, then is there any data that says that people's zinc level impacts whether or not they have critical illness? Well, this was done in September. So last month, new study came out of Japan. It's the International Journal of Infectious Diseases. Again, I know you guys have already seen this. You've probably already read this. No. What they showed was that when they looked in their ICU, that almost everyone that had a severe case, they all had either subclinical or clinical zinc deficiency. So I thought, pretty interesting. And the people that have used zinc as part of their treatment protocol, they've seen very positive results. And you have the molecular mechanism that shows you how it works. All right. Now we're going to talk about something. It's a bioflavonoid. It's called quercetin. So quercetin is found in apples. It's found in grapes. It's found in onions. So you get it in your diet, and it's a very useful molecule. And interestingly, quercetin is a zinc ionophore. So zinc plus 2 cannot go through a membrane. It has a charge on it. You need to wrap it up in another molecule to get it to go across the cell membrane into the inside, because you can't kill the copy machine unless you get the zinc inside the cell, because the copy machine is inside the cell. So what they showed was that quercetin and EGCG, which is what's in green tea, both of those effectively transport zinc into the cell. They actually believe that that's one of the reasons why both of those molecules have many different health benefits, because many enzymes require zinc. So what happens when you get enough zinc inside the cell? Well, the SARS-CoV-2 virus basically goes up to the copy machine, and it's like, oh my God, we got a paper jam, replicase enzyme, tray number 1. So zinc screws up the copy machine and makes life miserable for that SARS-CoV-2 virus when it's trying to make some copies. This could be a good Saturday Night Live skit with the old copy guy, but yeah. But it's never going to be 100%. That SARS-CoV-2 virus is going to end up making some copies. Well, what's the next step? When it makes a copy, it makes this huge long chain. And it turns out that it has a very specialized pair of scissors called 3CL Pro. And it has to snip that chain at 11 different points to make the individual chains that it folds up to make the proteins. So that the scissors are called 3CL Pro, and there's a lot of work going on now by pharmaceutical companies and researchers to create enzymes that will block 3CL Pro. But interestingly, you may not have to wait for that, because it turns out when they looked at 150 molecules, the number one molecule that inhibits that 3CL Pro enzyme, the scissors, is quercetin. So basically, when you have quercetin in the cell, it can bind to that enzyme and begin to shut it down. And that's what you want. So the quercetin delivered the zinc, but the quercetin itself can actually block the scissors. You can take the scissors away from that SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is pretty exciting. Interestingly, EGCG also works. Now, I wasn't surprised when I saw this study, because I had looked back at the original SARS-1, and guess what? EGCG and quercetin both inhibit 3CL Pro in the original SARS. So it's very likely that it's using the same scissors. And once you get something that can block it, you know, whether it's quercetin or whether it's EGCG, it should work. So blocking the scissors is a very robust approach, because even if the spike protein on the virus changes a little bit, doesn't matter, because it's using the same scissors. So, this is back on April 9th, I was telling people, look at the data on SARS-CoV-1 and look at the data on quercetin, on EGCG, and saying it doesn't prove anything, but it certainly appears to be beneficial to have some of these, in your diet. All right, so let's talk about the science is done. Let's talk a little bit about what I'm doing because I want to minimize my risk. Well, the US government suggests an upper limit for vitamin D of 4,000 international units per day. I believe that most people are going to need to take it at that level to bring their vitamin D levels above 32 nanograms per milliliter, which is, if you're in Europe or if you're in other places, they might put it in nanomoles per liter. That would be 80 nanomoles per liter. Now, I personally target to be between 40 and 50 nanograms per milliliter. And if you remember back on that infection chart, that was that little green oval. And I do that because I'm trying to minimize my risk of cancer. I'm trying to minimize my risk of respiratory infection. And I feel like that is a really good spot. The normal range goes from 30 to 100 nanograms per milliliter. Now, in supplemental magnesium, the US government suggests that people should take up to 350 milligrams a day of supplemental magnesium. Excuse me. I think most people need somewhere between 250 and 350 milligrams a day. But here's where it gets interesting. You want to take it as magnesium glycinate, magnesium citrate, or magnesium chloride, because all of those are really well absorbed. But a lot of supplements use magnesium oxide. And if you dig into the science, only 4%, so 4 molecules out of 100, actually are absorbed by the body, and the other 96% passes through you. And so magnesium oxide is cheap, It's also very concentrated, so you can make a small pill. And it works to put magnesium on the label, but it doesn't work very well for you. So, third thing is vitamin C. Your white blood cells need it to kill things. I normally take between 1/4 and 1/2 gram a day. And if I ever feel like I'm getting sick, then I'll start taking 1 gram maybe every 8 hours. So in today's world, you're always concerned that you're going to get, blacklisted or marked as fake news. So I was very happy to see that Dr. Anthony Fauci did an interview with the actress Jennifer Garner back in September. And if you jump in at the 32-minute point for, where she asks him specifically about supplements, he said, if you're deficient in vitamin D, that does have an impact on your susceptibility to infection. I absolutely agree. So I would not mind recommending, and I do it myself, taking vitamin D. I don't know how much he takes. I've heard some stories, but I don't want to comment on that. But it would be a substantial dose. And then he said the other thing I take that people take is vitamin C because it's a good antioxidant. Yeah, that's true. But vitamin C is more than an antioxidant. Your white blood cells use it to create reactive oxygen bursts to kill things. So to your white blood cells, it's like ammunition. So when you're not at war, your need for ammunition is at a relatively low level. But when you go to war with a virus or a bacterium, your demand for vitamin C goes up dramatically. So it's one of those ones where you only need a little each day, but if you start feeling sick, you have to ramp it up. Your white blood cells pull vitamin C out of your bloodstream until they have 50 or 100 times as high a concentration in themselves, and then they use it up. So be careful if you get sick, make sure that you are aware that your body's going to be using up vitamin C much more rapidly. On the zinc front, I personally take 15 milligrams of zinc with 1 milligram of copper. And you're like, John, what about, you haven't talked about copper. Well, zinc and copper both get absorbed through the same doorway, the same pathway. And, a lot of people say take 50 milligrams of zinc a day. Yeah, you could do that for a couple of weeks. That's probably not going to cause you any problems. But if you do that for 6 months or a year, all that zinc is going to push out the copper, and you may well end up with some type of copper deficiency. So that's why I like taking it in the correct ratio. And if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, zinc is even more critical because most of the people in this country that are zinc deficient are vegetarians and vegans because they get less zinc in their diet. And then plants have something called phytates or phytic acid, and it locks up the zinc and prevents it from being absorbed. So I would, make sure you pay attention to zinc, particularly if you are a vegetarian or if you're a vegan. On the quercetin front, I take 250 milligrams of quercetin a day, and I also drink, a cup or two of green tea a day because that also appears to be helpful. But I did that before the pandemic. Now, the last piece on my level 2 strategy is you need to get a reliable, low-cost pulse oximeter. It's your early warning system. Why? Because in those early stages where you don't know if you're sick or not, or you know that you're sick, but you don't know if you should go to the hospital or not, your pulse oximeter, if you're normally at 98, 99, 98, 97, and that starts to drop down to 94, 93, 92, it tells me that your lungs are being affected and you probably want to get, you want to get in and be seen relatively quickly. You don't want to wait until those air sacs in your lungs start filling up with jello. If you want to be able to monitor, and if you need treatment, you want to get in there. There are people that are showing up in emergency rooms who have oxygen saturation in the 80s, and they don't know it. I mean, it's like they're on top of Everest, they're about to pass out, and they don't even realize it. So, and I see a lot of questions. We're just about to get there. For people that really like to, do everything they possibly can, there is some data on vitamin B12. I take 1,000 micrograms, which is 1 milligram. I take it twice a week. I take it on Monday. I take it on Friday. I don't think you need to take it every day. And I also take something called NAC, which is, of course, N-acetylcysteine. I take 600 milligrams a day. Your body uses NAC to build glutathione, and glutathione is a critical molecule. NAC also has the ability to break down glop that forms in your lungs by reducing disulfide bonds. But you can take something which is glop in your lungs, and you can thin it out. So a lot of times people take that to treat mucus in their lungs. It's an over-the-counter supplement. I'm going to wrap it up. I want to jump in and look at some questions. And, Ben, I don't know if you've been tracking all the questions or if you want me to start scrolling through.
Yeah, John, I have a bunch of questions, and I will field those for you if you like.
Sure, yeah.
So let me see what we got here. So I have to go back. Let's see. Somebody asked about what is the best multivitamin that you would recommend.
Yeah, it's funny, how many supplements I take, but the interesting thing is I don't take a multi because the data is not really good on the multis. I take individual supplements. So I take some vitamin D, I take some vitamin C, I take some vitamin K2. In fact, I saw a question about what's an adequate amount of vitamin K2. Mm-hmm. The minimum amount you need each day is, based on the clinical studies, is about 45 micrograms, which is 0.045 milligrams. That's the least amount you can probably get by with. And vitamin K2 keeps the calcium from ending up in your arteries, and it gets it to the bones and to the teeth where it's needed. So when you take vitamin D, it makes sense to make sure that you get a little bit of K2 as well, because without the K2, some of that calcium can end up in your arteries, which is a really bad thing.
Okay. Can you get enough vitamin D and magnesium from just eating foods high in those vitamins, or do you need supplements?
On the vitamin D, you can just get a little bit from certain foods. Like if you take cod liver oil every day, you might get enough vitamin D from that. But most of the vitamin D in your body is made photochemically in your skin. And you need the sun to be high in the sky to deliver the right wavelength of light to make the vitamin D. And so as we move into fall, it becomes harder and harder and harder to make vitamin D in your skin. And in fact, in wintertime, if you're in Philadelphia or Maine, you could be outside for hours and hardly make any vitamin D. And if you wear any sunscreen completely shuts down vitamin D production in the skin. So on the vitamin D, I don't think you can get enough from food unless you eat, like I said, not a lot of people are taking tablespoons of cod liver oil every day now. What was the other one? I'm sorry, Ben, what was the other molecule?
They were talking about magnesium.
Yeah, you can get enough magnesium. Everything that's green has chlorophyll, and the center of chlorophyll is magnesium. So if you're a vegan or a vegetarian and you're eating a couple pounds of greens every day, you're probably fine. You also get a lot in almonds. You can get some in dark chocolate, and you guys can Google food sources of magnesium. So it's definitely possible to get enough magnesium from your food as long as you pick carefully. Now, I was eating healthy before I started supplementing with magnesium, and what I found was that I still ended up with very tight muscles in my lower back and my IT bands. And when I started adding in some more magnesium, my back pain got much better because the muscles relaxed. So when a muscle contracts, it's because of the calcium. When the muscle relaxes, it's because of the magnesium. So I think I think magnesium, you can do it from food. Vitamin D, I don't think it's going to work. You have to get some sun exposure. So
Okay. How stable are OTC vitamins, and should you take them past their expiration dates? Well, that's
I wouldn't take them past the expiration date. A lot of it's going to depend on what temperature they were stored at and how much moisture is in the bottle. Because when things are in a crystal, they're relatively stable. But as soon as you get a little moisture in there, they normally are going to start turning brown and they're going to start smelling differently. I would toss them after the expiration date.
okay. Let's see. If I take zinc picolinate, I guess it is.
Zinc picolinate, yes.
Oh, yeah. Should I
Picolinic acid, yeah.
Should I still supplement with copper?
I don't know. Maybe they can put in the chat how much zinc picolinate they're taking. You just have to be careful. Like I said, you need zinc and you need copper. And there have been some studies where people took high levels of zinc for a long time and it actually pushed down their copper. And low copper is going to give you gray hair. Low copper is going to bring up your LDL cholesterol. You know, you're not going to be able to make the myelin sheaths on your nerves. So low copper can be a nightmare. One thing I didn't mention on the copper is anyone that has Wilson's disease, which is a genetic defect of copper metabolism, you know, maybe 1 in 30 or 40,000 people have that. They should never take copper. But generally, people that have Wilson's disease, they know that and they don't take copper. But I just wanted to emphasize that fact.
Okay,
So
they're talking about 50 milligrams is what they were talking about.
Okay, 50 milligrams of zinc. Yeah. You could always do a blood test and just check your copper levels. And if they're okay, then I'd say you're probably all right. The normal rule of thumb for zinc copper ratio is about 15 to 1. So if you're taking 50 milligrams of zinc, you know, you'd want to have about 3 milligrams of copper. Like anything, too little will kill you and too much will kill you. If you're taking a bath and you only have 2 inches of water, you know, you don't get a good bath. But if you fill it up with 500 gallons and completely wipe out the first floor of your house, that's not good either. So every one of these micronutrients, you need to get the right amount. More is not better. So, you know, be careful that way.
Okay, there's another question about vitamin D. Can they get that from sun lamps?
You can. The sun lamp would have to produce what's called UVB, and they call it UVB because that's what gives you a sunburn. UVB goes from 290 to 320 nanometers. And so it would have to be a UVB lamp. You have to be very careful with your eyes. And remember that although UVB is good because it makes vitamin D, UVB also cross-links your DNA and creates skin cancer. So you have an enzyme that goes in every day and snips those cross-links to prevent you from dying from skin cancer. So UVB, a little bit is good. Too much, you're going to end up with a basal cell carcinoma, a squamous cell carcinoma, or possibly a melanoma. You don't want to, overdose on UVB. It's also wrinkling to your skin.
Can you mention any other benefits that lack of vitamin D, such as for the heart, brain, anything else?
No, vitamin D, if you think of, let's just say you have 20,000 different genes or 20,000 different apps, 2,000 of those require vitamin D or they don't work at all. So vitamin D is just fundamental to your metabolism. And you're going to end up with, low vitamin D can lead to low testosterone or have other hormonal issues. Low vitamin D can lead to more inflammation. Low vitamin D can lead to more cancers, for 7 or 8 different cancers. So vitamin D, impacts your metabolism. It's like saying, what do you use water for? Well, you drink it, you bathe in it, you shower with it, you do the dishes with it, you power wash the house with it. Vitamin D is like that in your body. It is used in so many different places because 10% of your genome requires it. And if you don't have it, and one of my friends, Dr. Nicholas Perricone, who's been on PBS specials, he's a famous dermatologist from Yale. He and I were talking, and he made the point. He said, for 20 years, I told people to avoid the sun because I wanted to reduce their risk of skin cancer. He goes, I wish I could go back to every one of those people and tell them to forget that, because lower vitamin D is more dangerous than the basal cell and squamous cell carcinomas. Now, I'd like to optimize both, meaning you get a little bit of sun every day, but get the sun on your legs or get the sun on your arms. Don't make vitamin D with your face because you don't want to look old and wrinkled. You don't want to damage you don't want to make a vitamin D solar panel on your face. So.
Right. So somebody also asked that if you have too many vitamins in your body, how your body disposes of those excess vitamins, or does it?
It does, yeah. There's 2 different types of vitamins. You have the water-soluble vitamins, so the B vitamins, and then you have the oil-soluble vitamins like, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K2. So the water-soluble ones, whatever your body doesn't use, generally your kidneys will eliminate those. So if you ever go to the restroom and your urine looks kind of fluorescent, it generally means that you just took your multi or you took a B complex, and that's giving it that fluorescent highlighter color in the toilet or whatever. But I mean, for me, you're never going to get 100% usage. So there's always going to, even if you're just eating food, you're going to excrete extra vitamins. I want to tune my biochemistry. Like, I'm 61. I was born in the 1950s. I got a 10-year-old son. He could fly. I gotta have some energy to chase after him. So for me, I want to tune my body. But I only take a B vitamin twice a week. I don't take it every day. So not only B12, but I take a B complex only twice a week. So this idea that you have to take everything every day is, I don't think is true. And so, I don't think, it's good if you're a vitamin company for people to take everything every day, but I don't think the data is necessarily there for it.
Okay, one other question is somebody asked just about the oximeter. Any recommendations on what you would recommend as far as brand wise?
Yeah, I don't remember the brand, but, and Ben, you remember back in our P&G days, I probably spent $1 million on instrumentation. So I did my homework, and I guess this is an Lenovo. The firmware was developed and the design was developed in the US. I think it's manufactured abroad. I thought this was the best bang for the buck. It had an OLED screen. If you hit the button, the screen rotates. So when I put it on the kids, I don't have to put my head upside down. It measures something called profusion index. So it tells you how good the signal is. So and it gives you your pulse train at the bottom of the screen. So I thought for $32, I thought this was a great choice. There are other good choices too, don't get me wrong, but this is the only one that I've really investigated deeply. So you could probably buy one for $25. I think it's worth the $7 to get these additional capabilities.
Okay, there's another question about diabetes. If you have diabetes, do you need more B12? And they're taking 1,000 milligrams 2 times a day.
Well, I'm guessing they're taking 1,000 micrograms, but there's 1,000. Yeah. I'm just saying it says milligrams, but I don't think anyone makes 1,000 milligrams. That would be, that would be a gram of B12. But yeah, so what happens is if you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, they're probably going to put you on metformin. And metformin has been shown to, in some people, create a vitamin B12 deficiency. So I'm guessing that the doctor probably has measured their blood level of vitamin B12 and is probably saying you need to supplement with B12. The tricky thing with B12 is that it has a special system in the body to absorb it. And a lot of people don't absorb it very well. So one thing that they could think about trying would be take a B12 pill and put it under their tongue and let it diffuse across that membrane and go right into their bloodstream. It's called a sublingual approach, as opposed to doing it in the gut, because lots of people they don't have the intrinsic factor that's necessary to absorb B12. I also much prefer methyl B12 versus cyano B12. And I'll just leave it at that. So if you look on the back, cyano is cheaper, but I think the methyl is somewhat better.
Okay, I think that should be, somebody's asking about chewable vitamins being better.
Yeah, I guess normally the chewables, they put some sugar in there and some flavor. Yeah, I think most of us get enough sugar from other sources. So you got to find something that works for you. Some people on the vitamin D, they buy drops and they do drops of vitamin D, and because they don't like to take pills. On the magnesium, I buy magnesium chloride crystals, and then every day when I make up my my water bottle, it's really not Tito's, I swear. Every day when I make up my water bottle, I put the magnesium in there, and so every time I have some water, I'm getting a little bit of magnesium. Because I really want to optimize that level, the level of magnesium in my body.